Good evening. Hi. We'd like to begin our event now. The Pellerin Fellowship represents one of the best things we do here. You know, there's certain aspects of architecture, art, all the design fields that have to be taught in a classroom. But for architecture in particular, that's plan B at best. Unless you get out there and you experience the world, unless you visit cities and you visit architecture and you really see what it's like to be there, unless you see what the spaces are like, unless you see what it's really made of, unless you walk down a city street, you're really missing something. If we could do it, we would certainly take all of our students out into the world all the time. It's difficult. We do our best. We have study abroad programs. We encourage people to travel. And we have this traveling fellowship. I wish we could do more of these. As it is, we're doing the best we can. So every year we have this event in the fall, the Pellerin Traveling Fellowship, where our graduate students who've been awarded the fellowship give a talk about their travel study during the past year. And we also, after that, we announce the nominees for this year, people who have submitted proposals, and we'll tell you who the winner is and who will be speaking here a year from now. So in order to start off, I'm going to introduce Samantha Tchaikovsky, who is the chair of the alumni cabinet of the College of Architecture and Design, who will conduct business here tonight. Samantha?
What's the login on the computer? Try what? No. You're wrong. Oh, LT. Capital? Lowercase? There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. As Martin mentioned, my name is Samantha Tchaikovsky, and I'm the 2016-2017 College of Architecture and Design Alumni Cabinet Chair. Our cabinet is made up of 9 alumni volunteers who each serve a 3-year term on the cabinet. And it's our goal as a cabinet to provide initiatives which support the ongoing development and success of our alumni so that they may continue to gain value from the university after graduation. The Pellerin Traveling Fellowship is one of our 2 annual award initiatives each year that we believe supports these goals. And it is both mine and the Cabinet's pleasure to recognize last year's recipients, Brean and Breck Crandell this year. The Alumni Cabinet has established the fellowship in honor of Earl W. Pellerin, who served on the faculty for 42 years here, 1932 to 1974, and was the first professor of architecture and was the founding dean of the College of Architecture and Design. Educated in the Beaux-Arts tradition, Dr. Pellerin firmly believed that travel was an important part of any architect's education. To honor his memory, the college and the Alumni Cabinet partner each year to award a travel and study stipend annually to a emeritus graduate student. While this year's nominees and fellowships winner will be recognized at the end of the evening, we will first hear presentations from the past year's winners. First, Brean and then Breck Crandell. Please also join us for the reception after the lecture in the Breck Gallery to see Breck and Brean's exhibition and to have the opportunity to learn more about their travels. Brean's proposal, titled Perception of Place, suggests a study of media influences on architecture to take place over a 30-day period in Cuba. So that's what you'll be hearing about from her. And Breck's proposal described an architectural study of nomadic seafaring groups in Southeast Asia. With presentations on 2 enticing topics ahead of us, I don't want to waste any more time, so I'm happy to present Brean, who will be followed by Breck Crandell to present their discoveries of the 2015 Pellerin Traveling Fellowships.
Okay, can everyone hear me? All right. So a year ago, I was given the opportunity to engage in a self-led educational experience in Cuba. The purpose of the 30-day journey was to indulge my curiosity about Cuban culture, which I had only ever experienced through media headlines. My goal was to study the perceived place by comparing the media-driven lens to the real cultural integrity of urban space. I wanted to take everything I had learned through articles, books, and the internet and put it to the test. I'd recognized the significance of allowing a culture, community, and its architecture to be the teacher. While I anticipated the importance of learning from a place firsthand, at the time I didn't truly understand the impact of it. In an effort to seek some guidance through this process of engaging a new place both culturally and architecturally, I reached out to Cuban architect Julio Cesar Perez Hernandez. Julio is an architect, urban planner, author, and educator. I had the pleasure of making his acquaintance during the beginning stages of my research. I learned his efforts to create the 21st century master plan for the city of Havana. This 10-year work is no ordinary master plan. It's one that's been tested over the course of several design charrettes by professionals and people from all over the world. The series of design charrettes is meant to put the plan in the hands of a diverse range of professionals and people, allowing for them to be a part of a movement into the future for a city which finds itself stuck in the past. Because this is a not-for-profit program, the decisions are made solely for the city and its people with respect for place and for design. I was fortunate enough to receive the invitation from Julio to participate in his 10th annual design charrette in March of 2016. It was a week-long workshop alongside professionals from all over the world. Our task was to consider the elaborate ideas for a master plan for the 21st century Havana in both economic and urban terms to allow for new urban infill to reinforce the cultural identity of the city. Now, this seemed like a large task, and having never been to Cuba, one I was certainly not qualified for. But Julio assured me that we would be given all the tools necessary to take up the challenge. The biggest tool he gave us was his time. The week prior to the design charrette, myself and a group of other professionals that Julio had invited to participate in this program were given a 7-day architectural tour of the city of Havana. He acknowledged the importance of understanding the city's history prior to working through design strategies for its future. The tour began in Old Havana, which is defined by the extent of its former city walls. Due to Havana's sensitive geographical location in the Caribbean, the city was heavily fortified. Within the boundary of the defensive walls, you can find a polycentric urban structure which maintains its original architectural environment and character. Here we can see the beginnings of urban and architectural strategies implemented throughout the city over time. We began in the city's oldest square, Plaza de Armas. Home to the Royal Tax Office and Governor's Palace, completed in 1791, we could see a transition from the Cuban Baroque architecture to the neoclassical style which dominated the 18th century architecture in Cuba. Now, as a student of architecture, this takeaway was the obvious and the anticipated. But in studying more closely, we began to learn of the qualities of these spaces which outlined the vision for public spaces in Havana. The spatial sequence between the governor's palace, the courtyard, and the adjacent architecture would become a model for the city as it transitioned through different economic structures, architectural styles, and cultural ideas. Traveling from the center of the square to the oversized arcade enclosed by columns, through the ornamental gateway carved from Cuban mahogany, and into the double-height vestibule, we were able to physically experience the impact of architecture and its scale. We entered the interior courtyard, and we could see that the axis of the main square is the same axis of the building as it aligns perfectly from the exterior to the center of the interior courtyard. The galleries surrounding the courtyard mimic the arcade that surrounds the square, and the courtyard itself echoes the square. The double-height first floor allows for a mezzanine level to provide horizontal circulation, and while these series of decisions are visually and proportionally effective, when standing in the shade of the courtyard gallery on an 80-plus degree day, you can feel a refreshing breeze and architecturally understand that the decisions served a greater purpose. They allow for cross-ventilation, creating a chimney effect up through the center of the space. The series of transitional spaces from the urban realm into the architectural realm cater to the natural elements of the place. Continuing our tour of the city through the different squares provides further evidence of this. As we moved from the public scale to the domestic scale, the elements previously outlined continued to be celebrated architecturally in ways which are appropriate for the new use. Consistent porch and cornice heights, gateway entries, double height first floors, interior courtyards, and mezzanines all maintain the urban condition which responds to the climate, geography, and cultural identity of the place and its people. The arcade is one of the primary architectural elements consistently employed throughout the city of Havana. Traditionally, it's a covered passageway with arches along one or both sides. In Havana, these passageways are the main transitional elements between the public and private realms. They're almost always packed with foot traffic. It's significantly cooler in the shelter of the arcades than it is in the street. This isn't only because of the shade that it provides from the heat of the tropical sun, but it's because the arcades are widely used on primary streets throughout the city. This is an important concept because when we look out further, we can see that the street grid of Old Havana is perpendicular to the sea. And when we reduce the scale even more, we can see that the newer districts, rather than following the grid of Old Havana, shift in order to maintain the orientation to the water. This is so that the sea breeze can be captured and pulled up through the main streets of the city, and then the arcade is not only providing shade, but it's also employing the chimney effect we experienced at the governor's palace, providing shelter and relief for its users. Understanding these early concepts were essential to engaging the 21st century master plan. As we transitioned from one district to the next, the architecture informed us of the history of the place. We began in the oldest square in the oldest district in Havana and literally walked through time. Stylistically, economically, culturally, we were able to place ourselves at different moments in history. Good or bad, we learned how to let the architecture be the teacher, and in doing so, we began to emotionally invest ourselves in the place, one way or another, and when engaging the future master plan for the city, we could make honest, informed decisions. Rather than being informed by the headlines, websites, and articles, we were informed by the place. When looking into ways to reinforce the polycentric structure, we could make decisions that understand the value of the grid, not just any grid, but Havana's grid. In studying the urban planning transitions from Old Havana to the early 20th century district of El Vedado, we could see the translation of the character of the historic fabric employed in a new civil and social construct. The majority of the plan for the El Vedado district was laid out in the second half of the 19th century and with a hierarchy of street networks defining the grid and entire blocks of green areas devoted to parks and gardens. It's known for its avenues lined with street trees and residential facades, which were set back, each requiring a garden and a porch, allowing for separation between the private and public realms. This demonstrated a more contemporary notion for living when compared to the high-density mixed-use buildings of Old Havana. In the early 1900s, the sugarcane industry peaked, resulting in the rapid development of the newly planned district. It experienced an influx of wealthy residents, resulting in streets lined with a series of villas which embody these concepts. The El Vedado district would become the most modern zone of Havana leading up to the 50s. Here you can find a range of architectural styles, including neoclassical, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, and the modern movement, all coexisting within the harmonious scale of the district. When studying in plan, we can see that the grid is oriented to the sea, and we can note that the development of the Malecon, the seaside boulevard that defines the edge of the city, was in conjunction with the development of the district. The careful planning and economic execution of the plan resulted in a district which maintains the character of the historic city in what was a contemporary way. The decisions were sensitive to the people and how they lived, as well as to the place and its natural elements. This was not the case when visiting the district of Alomar. A 1970s attempted solution for overcrowding in Havana, it was clear that the architectural vision for the place had fallen short. It was the largest public housing project in the country and was supposed to be a model city. The development was to accommodate 100,000 residents spread out in precast concrete structures organized into 25 zones. The zones were laid out in no particular order. The buildings positioned within the zone seemed to be arbitrarily dropped onto the site, and the site had no sense of landscaping strategy or orientation. The geographical location of this development is one that requires a vehicle to get into central Havana to work. Today, the busing system is so overcrowded that residents that live as far out as Alomar aren't able to get to the city to work in a reasonable amount of time. There's no infrastructure for transportation, and personal cars cost more than a house. Everything that we had studied about the roots of urban design in Havana had been completely neglected in this development. It lacked an understanding for the place and for its people. It was a project that had taken architecture out of the equation completely. After witnessing the busing system, driving and navigating the streets in and out of Havana, and living in the overcrowded, most densely populated area of the city, Looking into a new transportation system that would support urban infill was no longer an overwhelming task of the design charrette. Instead, the charrette became an opportunity to address an immediate need for the city, a need that I had a real understanding for. It's that kind of experience that makes us good architects, good designers. It takes passion and insight to create an authentic vision. Julio would say that architecture should impress people in all of their senses. And it's important to note that you cannot experience architecture with all of your senses through books, classes, and the internet. Had we not walked by the central train station and saw its inactive state, as well as its potential, we may not have learned about the extensive history of the electric railroad in Cuba, or looked so closely into the start and stop of all unused rail lines leading into the city. As a result, we propose reusing the railroad as a way to mitigate the existing unreliable vehicular transportation in a way to link the outskirts of the city to the underground metro stops outlined in the 21st Century Master Plan. I'm not going to claim that our team was the first to propose this idea. Julio seems to have thought of everything over the course of 10 years. But these charrettes are a way for him to break up a group of people into teams and give them prompts. The conclusions either reinforce his existing concepts or challenge them. They're effective because you are designing for a place that's impacting you every day while you're working for it and its people. So I began this journey with the intention of studying media's influence on architecture in Havana. Upon returning from this experience, I spent weeks thinking to myself, what does this even mean? Media's influence on architecture, what an audacious topic that I proposed. Like I said, the reflective portion of this project was a bit of a struggle, but thinking about that concept further, I started thinking about what defines media. Media can exist in many forms, whether it's painting, billboard, newspaper headline, Instagram post, Twitter feed, or like on Facebook. At its roots, it's a form of communication. And how that communication is perceived by its interpreters influences the way the topic is understood. The technology boom of the 21st century in America has created what seems to be limitless ways of communication. When we narrow the scope of architecture, we can experience it through media and drawings, physical models, three-dimensional models, Google Images, Google Earth, and now even in virtual realities. All of these tools allow us to experience and understand architecture in different ways. So when I was asking how media influences architecture, I guess what I was really asking was, how does media influence architects? How has the evolution of media and technology affected the world's perception on what architecture is or what it should be? How does it impact the way I think about, talk about, and learn about design? And with the increase of technology and computer software, are we finding a decrease in the amount of physical experience that architects get? In a lot of ways, the technology that's at our fingertips is a great thing. It allows us to study buildings in new ways, testing theories rapidly and realistically. The possibilities seem endless. But then I think of when I walked through the National School of Plastic Arts in Havana. I experienced its sculptural beauty, craftsmanship, thoughtfulness, and sensitivity to landscape and environment, and thought, what do we need technology for? The freedom of hand sketching is so evident here. So what would have happened if the architect had been given a computer instead of a pen? Now, I'm not suggesting we get rid of computers and social media. Millennials would completely lose their minds. But what I'm stressing is an almost use the power for good type of concept. In the field of architecture, we never stop learning, and Breck and I are standing here as examples of learning through experience. We can use authentic experiences to inform our work that's being done using technology. We have so many avenues for gathering and deciphering information that architects should be getting smarter with time, but it's so easy to use these avenues as an excuse not to ask questions and not to retain information. When you make arbitrary decisions in an effort to speed up the process into a cost-effective technical manner, you forget about the craft. It takes the education out and the architect out of the equation. You get Alomar. So what does this mean for future development in Cuba? The country has yet to experience the full impact of the technology boom. The recent and controversial discussion of the Cuban travel embargo is generating curiosity about the country as well as challenging perceptions. its social context is beginning to feel the impact of the U.S. 21st century media and technology. In the month I was there, I felt as though I was experiencing it with them for the first time, with a sort of frustrating understanding of how close but how far behind they were. I spent 2 weeks leading up to President Obama's visit, seeing the country in a state of rapid road construction, landscaping repair, and remodeling that Cuban people had described as work they hadn't seen in upwards of 30 years. If Obama came every month, nothing would ever need fixing, our friend Alex would say. I experienced the struggle accessing their internet zones within the city. And while the city had appeared to be stuck in the past, the concept of a Wi-Fi park was definitely new for me. They were zones regulated by the state where if you purchased internet time from the appropriate vendors, it allowed you to access wireless internet from your devices. They were always full, especially with teenagers at night. I understood the possibilities of the technology in front of them, which would make me wonder what will happen next. Well, 2 weeks later, the Rolling Stones happened next, with 500,000 people, myself included. After the concert, I was told that Cuba had never seen a show like that with such advanced lights, technology, and staging. It was as if I was watching the country fast forward through time, picking up a concert they had missed on the way. It was truly a unique experience. Things are changing in Cuba, at least they were when I was there. The architectural possibilities are wide open, and the only way to move forward is to do so with a respect and an understanding for what's there. This was the key to Julio's teaching, and an important lesson as the capabilities of modern-day technology can easily distract us from the craftsmanship of the past. So when I talk about technology in our country, I certainly don't take it for granted. In fact, I see it for its possibilities, and one thing that it does offer is the opportunity for travel. We have more travel resources than ever with the internet, and I was able to plan, coordinate, budget, and navigate my way through Cuba for a month through research online with blogs and websites like Airbnb. Prior to this experience, I had understood the place through what I had read and seen, mostly online. I learned about it from the perspective of others, and I had a predetermined conclusion based on an experience that I had yet to have. It's the difference between walking the streets in Google Earth and walking down them with blisters on your feet, covered in sweat, navigating through people, cars, and bikes with a constant reggaeton tune echoing off the street walls. Having the experience, learning from the history of the urban strategies and architectural character led to a completely different understanding. As we perceive a place prior to visiting, we tend to take a level of artistic license that creates excitement and curiosity, and oftentimes conclusions before the trip even begins. And then you get there. You have to wrap your head around the reality, which is always different than the daydream. This process is essential for architects, and I'm grateful for the opportunity the university has given me. I'm a better architect and a better student because of this experience, and I can't ask for much more than that. Breck returned from his trip on October 3rd of this month. I asked him one question the day he got back, which was your experience different than you expected it to be? His answer was yes, way different, way better, I think. There are many ways to experience architecture, but there's only one way to experience it, as Julio would say, with all of your senses. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I'll hand this off to Breck for more, and I'll see you all in the gallery afterwards. Thanks.
Can you hear me? Yes. Ooh. Thank you so much, Brean. That was awesome. And I saw her slides, but I didn't myself actually get a chance to hear what she was going to say. And it's astounding how many similarities we saw actually through our two presentations. So I'm excited for this. If not, we're going to use it anyways. So. How do you turn it back on? The button on the back? Okay. Cool. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight, especially thank you very much to my parents who came out tonight to support me, and they've supported me through my entire education up to the point where I graduated. last semester. And also thank you so much to my wonderful wife who allowed me to go on this trip, even though we got married 2 months ago. We went on our honeymoon and got back from the honeymoon, and I jumped on a plane to go to Asia for a month. I went searching for sea gypsies, which are traditionally nomadic tribes of waterfaring people that have roamed the Indo-Malay seas for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Nobody really knows. They don't have a written language, so they just tell stories to each other. When I received the award, I knew I wanted to travel with somebody. Unfortunately, Miriam couldn't take any more time off work, so I couldn't travel alongside my wife. So I asked my really good friend and seasoned world traveler, Rebecca Marshburn, Master of Urban Design candidate here at Lawrence Tech, if she would join me. Rebecca, by trade, is a writer, and so she brought an entirely different lens by which to view the people of Southeast Asia. Throughout this lecture, Rebecca will be stepping in to offer some bigger picture thoughts by way of prose, so I hope you all enjoy that. So if you'd like to come down and join me, and we'll give you a mic. Welcome. So in our travels, we encountered 3 main groups of what we had learned to call the Chow Lay, which translates from Thai to people of the sea. While each of these groups did offer slight variations in lifestyle and architectural themes, they're all astoundingly similar. Rather than take you on a linear walk through our travels, we've worked very hard to distill our documentation into a few themes that I really hope you could take something from. On the other side of the courtyard in the gallery, where we're going to go afterwards, if you could all join us, the content that we've pinned up is more of a chronological a storyline following our island hopping travels down what we call the Andaman coast, which is, the western coast of Thailand, through Malaysia. We took a stop in Singapore, and then to the fringes of an Indonesian archipelago. Originally, what inspired me to propose this area of the world for travel was actually these astounding, pristine images that I came across in the Arc Daily, which is my favorite website of all time. These pictures of isolated houses on stilts surrounded by these indigenous peoples on their houseboats, roaming the waters, children diving deep into the water to spear things with fish. Those isolated houses certainly do exist. That picture that you just saw was actually one of those houses. But to our surprise, most of what we actually found, even halfway across the world, and it was exactly halfway across the world, it was a 12-hour time change, people very similar to you and I. Smartphones, satellite dishes, even in their most remote areas, these Moken groups and Chow Lay are slowly being absorbed by modern society. It's certainly not to say that there's not tons that we can learn from these people. It's just important to note as I continue. First question I've been getting asked when I come home is obviously, how was your trip? Well, Rebecca, how was our trip?
Wet.
It was very, very wet. This is an actual screenshot from my phone. I didn't do my research prior to buying the tickets, so we happened to visit Thailand at the peak of monsoon season. What's also not pictured here is the 90% humidity or higher daily that we dealt with. I finally just had to accept that I wouldn't be dry for the entire month that I was going to be there. I just had to get used to it. Rebecca's from California, so she was totally used to it. I am not built for tropical environments, so. But this, like most of my successes, is what I will call a happy accident. Because watching these sea people adapt to harsh environmental conditions without having to deal with tourists in the way made this a very remarkable and truly unique experience. So the first thing we'll take a look at is the sea gypsies' relationship with water, which is very important. I'll start by stating the obvious. These people need water for transportation and circulation. The fish and the sea life they catch is their income, but it's also their source of the food that they eat. Everything they eat comes out of the ocean. They're masters of capturing rainwater, as we got to witness firsthand in the rainy season. Everybody's collecting water any way they can. And they also make good use of the tide to manage their waste and their garbage. Boats are everything. Everyone owns a boat or a canoe or a kabang. A kabang is a houseboat. Traditional Mokens used to live on their boats. Or longtails, which the other slide with the boats, the longtail is the one with the really long propeller. They use it to navigate through the mangroves, very tight spaces. They can get around very easily. And if you don't live on your boat, you use it to get just about everywhere you go. You use it every day for fishing. In these cultures, almost every male is a fisherman in order to sustain the family and the village. This is An. An is a fisherman that we met in a Malaysian river village. we were perusing through the neighborhood, and he actually invited us into his home. We sat with him and talked with him for a long time, and then he ended up asking us to go fishing with him, of all things. So we did, of course. Unfortunately, my German-Irish complexion is not built for tropicals, so I was very busy trying not to die, but meanwhile, Rebecca seemed to really enjoy herself. I think it's important to note that we didn't catch a single fish the entire day that we were out, and it was almost a full day. This is a fish that An caught, but regardless, it was really nice to get a really close, in-depth look at the way these people live their daily lives. Water's very important to them for cleaning. Here's a group of children cleaning their legs off after a soccer game, and that is absolutely disgusting, and let me explain why. The space beneath stilt homes is also where they discard human waste. Every house has a hole in the floor, and when they're finished, they use a bucket of water to kind of like splash it in. So when you're walking through these villages, you'll hear splashing constantly, and you know people are cleaning themselves or using the bathroom, whatever. Eventually, the tide comes in and washes us all away. But the area beneath homes is not a place to hang out. It's usually got like chickens, dogs, rats, snakes, and sometimes a kid. But in every village we went to, it's very clear that they've mastered the art of collecting rainwater for later use. Buckets, funnels, barrels, anything that can hold water is fixated together so that water can be stored for cleaning, bathing, drinking, anything you can imagine fresh water being used for. In some of the more developed areas, they even started to use water towers, where they would push the water up above them so that they could create pressure for washing and for bathing.
Tide tells time. It determines everything. The fishing, the netting, the fixing, the selling, but always there's time for the washing. Hung on the line, regardless of tide, there is always, always time for the washing.
So the village probably most connected with water was in the Ryu Islands of Indonesia, which is just south of Singapore. This was one of the last places we actually visited. But here it's called Pulau Bintan. We found the homes that most closely resembled those Arcadale fairy tale images. Those black dots really far off, like way off in the distance, are actually more homes and floating fishing rigs that exist like way far out to sea. We'll get a zoom in on one of these fishing rigs here. They're not necessarily homes, but most fishermen come out here after the sun's gone down and the heat dies off, and they'll go fishing all night. They're actually quite sophisticated structures with net and trap systems that like hang beneath. Nearby, though, these are the houses that they actually live in. While the fishing rigs have to float over deep water, be anchored in place, their actual homes are built on stilts in the shallow sandbars by far out islands. So they actually try and stay very far away from the mainland shore. And the only way to access these places is by boat. So now we've seen a couple of the homes. Let's talk a little about how they build the homes. All of the homes are built almost the same. It's post and beam construction with a gabled roof. Most of them are on stilts. Many of the stilts that we saw are built of wood, but some of the older settlements that have existed for a very long time, the wood starts to really deteriorate in the salt water, and so they're slowly replacing them. You'd see like pillars against piles against wood and all sorts of stuff fixated to hold these things up. But the most common one to use was actually concrete. So they would slowly replace the wood with concrete. We saw evidence of that. So here in America, we have set criteria that determines if a building's successful. Structural integrity, material longevity, interaction with people, does it meet code, blah, 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 blah. But to these people, building is successful if it does two things. One, it keeps you dry, and two, you keep out of the sun. Their style is an architecture of necessity. Nothing more, nothing less.
Like the water with which the sea gypsies exist, they too flow in the path of least resistance.
And they will always take the path of least resistance. They take the if it's not broke, don't fix it to a whole nother level. Which means that buildings are constantly shifting, changing, morphing to keep up with the relentless damage of the elements. I can assure you if we went back to these same villages right now today, every building would look a little bit different because they're constantly performing maintenance and repairs. And this constant maintenance also applies to the most important object in their lives, which is their boats. In every location, this is across the board, we saw people stripping, painting, repairing, or building brand new boats. This is common practice for them. Because of this patchwork style of building, their architecture is at constant risk of failure. We walked on some really, really sketchy docks and boardwalks that are, 30, 40 feet over the open ocean. In fact, Rebecca and I actually fell through a bridge in the remote island of Ko Chang. It left me with some pretty gnarly bruises on the inside of both of my thighs. It was not fun to walk on for the next 3 weeks after that, but we're very lucky that it wasn't much worse than that. But one of my favorite locations on the entire trip was this surreal village island named Koh Phangan, which exists really, really deep into a national park. And it's only accessible by individual longtails. You have to haggle with them at the entrance of the park and get them to take you back there. But we found a ride. They call it the Floating Village. It looks like something straight out of a Miyazaki movie. It's amazing. In terms of construction, these people have no code books or load calculation charts to show them what can stand or what can be held by a beam or a column. They only have their intellect and their tactile senses to know what can support what. Clearly, they're comfortable living over water because the entrance to each of these homes right here, it's like a 5.5-inch wide board that they walk on in order to get into their house. They trust what they build to a very, very high degree. Failure of this construction means falling 30 or 40 feet into garbage, scrap material, human waste, or the open ocean. This could mean serious injury or even death. Very much unlike America, there's no one to sue here. So everyone's responsible for their own safety. To say the least, their structures are not barrier-free, and they're certainly not ADA accessible. Which brings us to materials. I think this is one of my favorite photos that I took the entire trip. We didn't even bring a camera, we just took an iPhone, in a waterproof case. So everything you're seeing here was just from one phone. Really sums up their patchwork style of construction. They're not afraid to use any material that comes their way. Here in America, we have this thing with materials. So say you use a 2x2 pink tile. You want all of the tiles on a surface to be 2x2 pink tiles. We like to use the same thing. For the chow lei, no way. They will use one of every tile until that surface is covered. It doesn't matter where it come from or where they got it. They're still going to use it. The result's like this busy pattern that always has kind of a certain charm to them. Let me give it to you straight. These people are architectural scavengers. One man's trash is another man's house. They'll take any material and they'll find a use for it. In Thailand, there seems to be no such thing as construction waste because these people use every last bit of it. Unlike Native Americans who will find a use for every little bit of the animal that they've hunted, the chow lei will find a use for every screw, bucket, or vinyl advertisement that they can find. Actually, vinyl advertisement is one of the best materials you can get your hands on. Do you remember the fisherman An? Because this is An's house that he built all himself. All the material was scrapped from nearby Georgetown and their construction waste. So allow me to share with you my favorite example of architectural scavengers. That little orange dot there is this teeny tiny island called Koh Lipe, which is a brutal 2-hour-long speedboat away from the mainland. It started off all fun and everybody's laughing because the boat's just slamming up and down. And 2 hours into it, you turn around and everybody's throwing up off the side and the people are just laying there lifeless. But the reward is this tropical paradise. And that is an actual photo that we took right before we fell asleep on the beach. Well, Rebecca fell asleep. I was trying not to burn alive. But here in Koh Lipe, the only people on the island are either Urak Lawoi villagers, true villagers of these nomadic people, or they're resort owners. And every resort bungalow is built to resemble the traditional Urak Lawoi island construction of bamboo and thatch. When the high season comes to an end, and that's what they call a high tourist season, when the tourism starts to die down, these bungalows that are deemed too damaged to repair are actually carried off and tossed into a big pile. Follow me here, it gets really interesting. Is that actual Urak Lawoi no longer use bamboo and thatch houses. Because one, who wants to take the time to weave their own thatch when you can just lay in a hammock all day, which is what they do. Like I said, always the path of least resistance. And if you can find corrugated tin, it keeps the rain out and it's going to last way longer anyways. So in this comical pattern of reuse, the Urak Lawoi villagers actually scrap the discarded bungalows that are meant to look like their buildings, and they use it to build their actual homes. That, the original bungalows are meant for these tourists, but it ends up being in the hands of these villagers. So meanwhile, the actual village, which is on the right-hand side, is fenced off from those resorts that are meant to look like Iroquois villages. And the actual village doesn't look anything like this fairy tale representation of their construction. While the buildings themselves are fascinating to study, what's equally interesting are the locations of these villages. Keep in mind, we titled this presentation Searching for Sea Gypsies for a reason. They're not easy to find. Most of those villages that we came across were either way off the beaten path or discovered entirely by accident. Surprisingly, the internet was very little help in these excursions. Instead, we ended up following maps. We found it written on some sign or something using outdated books. But most of all, we relied on people's word of mouth. If somebody told us that they knew where a village was, we'd go on it because we didn't have anything else to do. Originally, it was hard to track these people because they were nomadic, but now it's just because there's very little about them in the internet. Let's take a look at it, for example, Ko Chang. This is where we fell through a bridge. It's the most remote location that we visited the entire trip. We took this boat filled with tons and tons of people, and we all got on the speedboat, and we took this boat to this island, and then there was this lone pier that stuck out into the water, and they dropped the two of us off, and we're like, where's everybody else going? Like, we're going to another island. And so they just left the two of us, and we turned around, and we're just on the fringe of this tropical jungle. It was just us. It was a 2-hour hike through the most torrential downpour of rain I've ever experienced just to get to our shack for the night, and we didn't see a single person that entire 2-hour hike.
The way to the Moken is not by road. It is by high sea, scorched sun, damp earth, silt, tide, and mold.
So it was here on Ko Chang that we discovered the only true Moken village of our travels. We hiked along this beach through the jungle. We actually ended up running into a guy who told us we were going in the wrong direction, told us to change our direction and follow a stream. You had to walk in the stream until eventually you saw a path that you could very easily miss. Followed this small path up a mountain and then back down the mountain. And then finally, through this thick vegetation, we opened up into this tiny secluded village. We're so relieved to actually find it. Historically, the Moken were nomadic peoples. They would travel by boat to temporary locations, and they would fish and live there until the government would come after them, or a natural disaster occurred, which has happened before. In 2004, these people actually gained a lot of international fame because they saw telltale signs of a huge tsunami coming in. Every one of them headed for high ground. They lost everything. They don't have a village, they don't have boats, anything, but not a single one of the villagers died in this area. Or more commonly, they would move if the fish moved. So they would follow the fish to find them because that was their commerce. They would abandon their homes and take to another area, so on and so forth. This meant that they place very, very little value in ownership. There's no room for sentiment when you live constantly on the move, or when everything you own can disappear on a whim. And not owning anything really challenges the concept of ownership. How do the Sea Gypsies distinguish between public and private space? Well, to be honest, we're not exactly sure. It seems like they don't. The line between public and private space was always blurred. Despite being obvious outsiders, because we were rock stars there. People want to take photos with us all the time. But we were always welcomed into their daily lives to interact with them, to watch them weave nets, to watch them pull the fish out of their nets, to clean, repair, just relax. We were always invited. Their traditional ways and our modern world are converging. In Malaysia, these small fishing villages existed right next to manufacturing plants of recognizable brand names like Samsung or Toshiba. This juxtaposition looks like a Photoshop collage that's highlighting a wealth gap, but it's actually very real. A lot of these river villages existed right between two strips of, industry so that they could gain materials from them, and it gave them direct water access to the open ocean where they used for fishing. Regardless of how they determine ownership, there's always one unifying factor in chalet villages, and that's this common public space. Usually, it was a pier that acts as a pathway that connects all the homes. This is one of my favorite moments of the entire trip. We It's one of the last villages that we found, and we were walking out to the very end of the pier at sunset, and we turned around and we were followed by like 45 of these kids that had just like saw us coming from a mile away, and they all gathered right at the back. So we ended up taking a selfie with them, and then one of the older ones asked us if we had a Facebook. Yeah, so I actually got friended by like 6 of these kids that very evening. So I'm friends with these like 10-year-old kids from this, nomadic sea village in Malaysia. Or no, this was in Indonesia. Sorry.
All these private lives on display through open doors, open windows, open boats docked in bays. We watch all these private lives, pacing above water, perched on concrete, repairing jetties, watching movies, checking statuses, allowing the outside always to see in. Do good fences unmake neighbors?
So the times are certainly changing for these once nomads of the Andaman Sea. Most of the villages that we visited have been granted permanent refuge in these national parks or on state-owned land. The government basically came after them and said, you can't move away anymore. You can't keep running. We won't tax you, but you have to stay still. You can't belong to 5 or 6 different countries. So the Chowle's ability to move has been shut down. As a result, villages are taking a much, much more permanent characteristic on satellite dishes, motorbikes, cell phones, ever present. Kind of like what Brean saw.
Even here, halfway across the world, I can see your YOLO.
That we did. It's kind of funny, in all the areas that we went to in this whole region of the world, fashion doesn't exist. I just thought that was something I could throw out there. It just doesn't exist. They wear whatever is shipped to them from elsewhere in the world. So you'd see Bulls jerseys and sweatpants everywhere. It's just crazy. But this all has a lasting effect on a culture of people who are used to moving almost constantly. Just as the structure is evolving, so is their culture. With the popularity of Thailand's tourism on the rise, it's getting very, very popular, especially in the national park that we saw, they've adapted to foreign tourists as much as themselves. They serve the tourists almost more than themselves sometimes. Many villages have transformed the front half of their home into a business, so they'll sell their fresh seafood that they caught for the day to tourists because they can make way more money rather than selling it to the restaurants in the area. They'll also sell trinkets that they make, or they'll scrap seashells and sell those. This whole idea of sea gypsies in general has almost become this touristic catch. It's turned into a human zoo, where village locations are being printed on maps and street signs as if they were a destination for photographers and tourists. Most literature that exists about the Moken and Orang Laut speaks about saving and maintaining their traditional ways. But not many books or articles are discussing that they might actually be accepting the ways of modern life and culture. The Moken and other sea gypsies don't seem to mind this transition nearly as much as the people writing these books. They don't seem to mind watching cable television or owning an iPhone rather than donning their traditional garb and picking up a spear to jump into the water and get fish for this perfect photograph that'll then be featured in the Ark Daily. The subtitle of this presentation was The Last of the Moken. And that's because it feels like what we witnessed was a handful of the last people truly living by way of sea. The nomadic lifestyle is dwindling. The children of this generation are learning about a lifestyle that they themselves never experienced. So let me leave you with a few closing thoughts, and then one last bit of prose from Rebecca. Is their simplicity of architecture a source of their stress-free lifestyle that I'm so jealous of? Is there a lack of sentimental value in material objects what allows them to scrap and rebuild, to let go and to move on so quickly? Does holding on to the past restrict us from moving forward? Maybe it's time to let change.
Do we ask others to live how we imagine them to, so we can preserve nostalgia for lifestyles we never knew?
Thank you.
I think it's on now. Okay. No, those were seriously, I think, some of the best Pellerin lectures that we've had, and we were lucky to get to tonight. So that was fantastic. Thank you guys so much. Another round of applause. And again, we have a reception over in the gallery across the street after we recognize this year's nominees and this year's winner. Oh. Luckily, that's not revealing anything. So I'm not sure if everyone is here tonight, but if you were nominated for this year's Pellerin Fellowship, we do have a certificate for everyone, and I apologize if I mispronounce any names. So I will read them off, and if you're here, please come down and get your certificate. Martin's going to join me to help pass those out. And we will announce the winner too. Great. Do you want to do the names?
Go ahead.
Okay. So, okay. So I apologize if I mess up any names, but one of the nominees this year was Ryan Elm. Is Ryan here tonight? No. Okay. Brandon Kaea. Are you here? Please come down if you're here.
Yes.
Jad Chadid? No? Okay. Brian Kecken? Is that right? Rachel Kowalczyk? Shani Kunan? Nathan Laurie? Megan Markowitz? I think she's here. Not here. Georgie Prendy? No? No? Yep, and finally, this year's 2016 Pellerin Fellowship winner is Emily Matt. Congratulations. Congratulations to all of you guys, and thanks again for our awesome lecturers. You guys were fantastic. So at this time, if you guys can all join us over in the gallery, we'll be happy to see you there. There's some snacks and refreshments too.